The dinner rush at the Harborview restaurant was finally winding down. It was a Thursday evening, and the kind of quiet that settles in around 8 o'clock had begun to fill the dining room. Only a handful of tables were still occupied, mostly couples finishing their desserts and lingering over coffee. In the corner of the restaurant stood a beautiful grand piano. Its polished black surface reflected the soft glow of the chandeliers above. Most nights, especially on weekends, a professional musician would sit there and play elegant background music while guests enjoyed their meals. But tonight the piano bench sat empty. The scheduled player had called in sick at the last minute, and the silence where music should have been felt somehow heavier than no sound at all. A young woman in her late 20s moved between the tables with practiced ease. Her name tag read Jenny, and she wore the standard uniform of the restaurant, a crisp white shirt, black vest, and dark pants. She carried herself with a quiet efficiency that came from doing the same job, day after day. 3 years she'd been working here. 3 years of taking orders, carrying trays, refilling water glasses, and offering the dessert menu with a polite smile. Jenny had the kind of face that people forgot easily. Not because there was anything wrong with it, but because she had perfected the art of blending in. She was friendly but not overly chatty. Professional but not cold. She did her job well, collected her tips, and went home at the end of her shift. Her coworkers knew her as reliable and pleasant, but beyond that, they didn't know much about her at all. That's exactly how Jenny wanted it. She wiped down table 7, collecting the dirty dishes onto her tray with smooth automatic movements. Her mind was already thinking about table 3, where a couple would probably want their check soon, and table 9, where the older gentleman always ordered decaf coffee with his chocolate cake. This was her rhythm. This was her life now. As she worked, her eyes occasionally drifted to the piano in the corner. They always did, even when she tried not to look. It sat there like an old friend she was no longer allowed to speak to. Beautiful, silent, waiting. Nobody at the restaurant knew that Jenny understood that piano better than almost anyone who'd ever played it on weekend nights. They didn't know that she could identify the make and model from across the room, or that she knew exactly how the keys would feel under her fingers. Slightly weighted, responsive, with that particular resonance that only a well-maintained instrument could produce. They didn't know because she'd never told them. Why would she? That part of her life was over. The restaurant manager, a middle-aged man who'd always treated Jenny fairly, stood near the kitchen door looking worried. He kept glancing at the empty piano, then at his watch, then back at the piano again. Jenny knew what was bothering him. The restaurant prided itself on atmosphere, and the lack of music, even on a slow Thursday, disrupted the carefully crafted ambiance that justified the high prices on the menu. Jenny carried her tray of dishes to the kitchen, pushed through the swinging doors, and deposited everything at the washing station. When she came back out, she grabbed a clean cloth and a spray bottle and headed toward the front windows. They always needed attention, especially after rain, and it looked like the weather might turn tonight. Dark clouds were gathering over the harbor, visible through the large windows that gave the restaurant its name and its view. As she worked, she could hear snippets of conversation from the occupied tables. A couple discussing their upcoming vacation, 2 business associates talking about a merger, an elderly woman telling her companion about her granddaughter's college acceptance. Normal things. Pleasant things. The kind of background noise that made up the soundtrack of her working life. But something felt different tonight. Maybe it was the empty piano. Maybe it was the storm clouds gathering outside. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Something Jenny couldn't quite name. A restlessness. An ache that had been dormant for so long she'd almost convinced herself it was gone. It wasn't gone. It had never been gone. Jenny's childhood had been filled with piano music. From the age of 5, she'd spent hours every day at the keys, first learning simple scales and songs, then progressing to more complex pieces. Her teacher, a stern but passionate woman who'd once performed in concert halls across Europe, had recognized something special in Jenny. A natural talent, yes, but more than that. A deep, almost spiritual connection to the music itself. By the time Jenny was 13, she was winning competitions. Local at first, then regional. Her bedroom shelves filled with trophies and certificates. Her parents, working-class folks who'd sacrificed plenty to afford the lessons and the piano, beamed with pride. This was Jenny's path. This was her future. Everyone said so. She'd planned to study music in college. She dreamed of it constantly, not fame necessarily or wealth, just the ability to spend her life immersed in the things she loved most. To teach, to perform, to exist in that world where music mattered above all else. Then her father got sick, cancer, aggressive and expensive. The medical bills piled up faster than anyone could have imagined. Her mother took on extra shifts at the hospital where she worked as a nurse, but it wasn't enough. There were treatments to pay for, medications, procedures. The college fund disappeared first. Then the savings. Then they had to make harder choices. Jenny had been 17 when they sold her piano. She remembered watching the movers carry it out of the house, remembered the hollow space it left in the living room, remembered feeling like part of her soul had been loaded onto that truck and driven away. Her father died 6 months later anyway. Jenny had gotten a job instead of going to college. First at a diner, then at this restaurant. The money was better here, and she was good at the work. It required a different kind of performance, a different kind of reading the room. She learned to anticipate what customers needed before they asked. She learned to smile even when her feet hurt and her back ached. She learned to be invisible when that's what the moment required, and present when her attention was needed. She learned to walk past pianos without crying. Most days, she was fine. Most days she didn't think about what might have been. Most days she accepted that life had taken her down a different path. And that was just how things worked out sometimes. You couldn't control everything. You couldn't plan for tragedy. You adjusted. You survived. You moved forward. But some days, like today, with that empty piano sitting there and the rain beginning to tap against the windows, the old ache came back strong enough to take her breath away. Jenny finished with the windows and moved back toward the dining area. The restaurant was even quieter now. 2 tables had left and only 3 remained. The evening was nearly over. Soon she'd count her tips, clock out, take the bus home to her small apartment, and do it all again tomorrow. The manager was still standing by the kitchen door, still looking at that piano with a troubled expression. He caught Jenny's eye and opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, then seemed to think better of it and looked away. Jenny felt her heart start to beat a little faster, though she couldn't say why. Something was about to happen. She could feel it in the air like the electricity before a storm finally breaks, and outside, the first drops of rain began to fall in earnest, drumming against the windows of the Harbor View restaurant. The rain was coming down harder now, creating rivers on the windows that distorted the view of the harbor outside. Jenny could hear it drumming on the roof, a steady rhythm that seemed to pulse through the entire restaurant. Thunder rumbled somewhere in the distance, still far off but moving closer. She was refilling water glasses at table 5 when the manager finally walked over to her. His name was Richard, and in the 3 years Jenny had worked here, she'd found him to be fair and decent. He didn't yell at his staff or play favorites. He was just a middle-aged man trying to run a good restaurant, and tonight he looked particularly stressed. "Jenny," he said, keeping his voice low so the remaining diners wouldn't hear. "Can I ask you something?" She set down the water pitcher and turned to face him, waiting. Her stomach did a small flip, though she couldn't explain why. She wasn't in trouble. She'd done nothing wrong. But something in his expression made her nervous. Richard glanced at the piano, then back at her. He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "This is going to sound like a strange question, but do you happen to play piano?" The words hit Jenny like a physical blow. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The water pitcher suddenly felt heavy in her hand. She stared at Richard, trying to process what he'd just asked, trying to figure out how he could possibly know. What?" she managed to say. "Piano," Richard repeated, gesturing toward the instrument in the corner. "Do you play? I mean, did you ever learn? Even just a little bit?" Jenny's mind was racing. How did he know? Had someone told him? Had he somehow found out about her past? But no, that didn't make sense. The question was too casual, too uncertain. He didn't know. He was just asking randomly, desperately, because he needed someone to fill that empty piano bench. "Why do you ask?" she said, stalling for time. Richard ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Look, I know it's a weird question, but David called in sick and I don't have anyone to play tonight. I know it's not a big deal on a Thursday, especially with the storm keeping people away, but..." He trailed off, looking embarrassed. "I just thought maybe, if you happen to know a few songs, even simple ones, it would be better than nothing." Jenny felt her hands start to shake. She set the water pitcher down on the nearest table before she could drop it. The piano sat there in the corner, silent and waiting, just like it had been all evening. Just like it had been for 3 years. She should say no. She should tell him she didn't play, had never played, didn't know the first thing about it. That would be the safe answer, the smart answer, the answer that would keep her walls up and her old wounds protected. I used to, she heard herself say. A long time ago. Richard's face lit up with hope. Really? That's great. Would you be willing to play something? Nothing fancy, just background music. Simple stuff. Whatever you remember. Everything in Jenny wanted to refuse. Her heart was pounding now and her palms felt sweaty. She hadn't played in front of anyone in over 10 years. What if she'd forgotten how? What if her fingers didn't work the way they used to? What if she sat down at that beautiful instrument and discovered that the part of her that had once made music was dead and gone forever? But another part of her, a part she'd tried so hard to bury, was screaming yes, begging for this chance, aching for it with an intensity that surprised her. I don't know if I'm any good anymore, she said quietly. It's been a really long time, Richard. I might mess up. That's okay, he assured her quickly. Honestly, Jenny, anything is better than silence. And if it doesn't work out, no pressure. Just try for a little bit, see how it goes. Jenny looked at the piano again. Her throat felt tight. She thought about all those years of practice, all those competitions, all those dreams. She thought about her father, who'd always sat in the front row at her recitals, beaming with pride. She thought about the day they'd sold her piano, and how she'd felt like she was watching her future being carried away. Okay, she whispered. I'll try. Richard's relief was visible. Thank you so much, really. Just play whatever feels right. Take your time. He walked away quickly, probably afraid she'd change her mind. Jenny stood there for a moment, frozen, staring at the piano. The 3 remaining tables of diners paid her no attention. They were absorbed in their own conversations, their own little worlds. They had no idea what this moment meant. Jenny's legs felt shaky as she walked across the dining room. Each step seemed to take forever. The distance between where she stood and where the piano waited felt enormous, like crossing a canyon. Her whole body was tense, every muscle tight with anxiety and anticipation. When she reached the piano bench, she stood beside it for a long moment, just looking at the keys. They were pristine, perfectly clean, black and white in their eternal pattern. She could see her reflection in the polished surface of the wood, distorted and uncertain. Slowly, carefully, she sat down. The bench was the right height. Someone had adjusted it recently, probably for David, who was taller than she was. She reached down and turned the knob, lowering the seat until it felt right. Muscle memory kicked in without her even thinking about it. Her body remembered even if her mind was full of doubt. She placed her hands on the keys but didn't press down, just felt them there, cool and smooth under her fingers. It had been so long, so incredibly long. Her last piano teacher's voice echoed in her memory. Feel the music before you play it. Let it live in you first, then let it out. Jenny closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She could smell the faint scent of lemon polish, could feel the slight texture of the ivory. Outside, the rain continued its steady drumming. Inside, the restaurant was warm and quiet, waiting. What should she play? Her mind raced through possibilities. Something simple, Richard had said. Background music. Nothing fancy. She thought of all the pieces she'd once known by heart. Hundreds of them, from basic exercises to complex concertos. But which ones could she still remember? Which ones would her hands still know how to play? She decided to start with something easy. A simple melody she'd learned when she was 12, pretty but uncomplicated. A piece that had always felt like comfort to her, like a warm blanket on a cold night. If she could play that without embarrassing herself, maybe she could try something more. Her fingers found their positions on the keys. She could feel her heart hammering in her chest. This was it. After all these years of walking past this piano, of pretending that part of her life didn't exist anymore, she was actually going to play. What if she failed? What if nothing came out but discordant noise? What if she'd lost the gift entirely? But what if she hadn't? Jenny pressed down on the first key, and the note sang out clear and pure into the quiet restaurant. It was a beautiful sound, resonant and true. Her finger moved to the next note, then the next. The melody began to take shape, hesitant at first, like someone learning to walk again after a long illness. The businessman at table 3 glanced up briefly, then returned to his phone. The couple at table 9 didn't seem to notice at all. The elderly woman at table 6 paused mid-sentence, tilted her head slightly as if listening, then continued her story. Jenny's hands moved across the keys, finding their way through the familiar melody. It was rusty, yes. There were small hesitations, tiny stumbles where her fingers didn't quite remember what came next, but it was working. She was actually playing. After all this time, the music was still there, buried but not dead. As she played, something started to shift inside her. The nervousness began to fade, replaced by something else, something warm and alive and achingly familiar. It felt like coming home after a very long journey. It felt like finding something precious she'd thought was lost forever. Her fingers grew more confident with each measure. The melody flowed more smoothly. She could feel the tension leaving her shoulders, her breathing becoming deeper and more natural. The piano responded to her touch like it had been waiting for her specifically, like it recognized her somehow. And then, without planning it, without even deciding to, Jenny transitioned into something more complex. Her hands moved into a different piece, one she'd performed at a competition when she was 16. It was harder, more demanding, requiring both hands to work independently in intricate patterns. She shouldn't be attempting this. She'd told Richard she would play simple background music. But her hands had made the choice without consulting her brain, and now there was no going back. The music poured out of her, growing richer and more layered with each passing moment. Jenny's eyes were still closed, but tears were forming beneath her lids. She was playing, really playing, and it was like no time had passed at all. The music filled every corner of the Harborview restaurant. What had started as tentative background melody had transformed into something entirely different. Jenny's fingers danced across the keys with increasing confidence, pulling notes from deep within the instrument and sending them soaring through the air. She wasn't thinking anymore. Thinking would have ruined it. Instead, she was feeling, remembering, letting her hands tell a story they'd been holding on to for more than a decade. The piece she was playing now required both technical skill and emotional depth. Her left hand maintained a steady, rolling bass line, while her right hand wove intricate melodies above it, the two parts intertwining like dancers who knew each other's moves perfectly. At table 9, the couple who'd been so absorbed in their conversation had gone completely silent. The man had lowered his fork halfway to his mouth and forgotten about it. His wife sat with her hand frozen on her wine glass, her eyes fixed on the corner where Jenny sat at the piano. The businessman at table 3 had set down his phone. He'd been checking emails, responding to messages, only half present in the restaurant, but now his full attention had shifted. He turned his chair slightly to get a better view of the piano, his face showing confusion mixed with wonder. This wasn't the usual pleasant background music he'd heard here before. This was something else entirely. The elderly woman at table 6 had stopped talking mid-sentence. Her companion, a younger woman who might have been her daughter, had turned around in her seat to watch. Neither of them moved. They just listened, completely captivated. Even Richard had emerged from the kitchen doorway where he'd been standing. He walked slowly into the dining room, moving like someone in a dream, his eyes wide with disbelief. He'd asked Jenny to play simple background music. What he was hearing now was anything but simple. Jenny played on, unaware of the attention she was drawing. Her eyes remained closed, tears now streaming freely down her cheeks. She didn't try to wipe them away. She barely noticed them. All of her focus, all of her being, was channeled into the music flowing from her fingertips. The piece she was playing had always been one of her favorites. She'd chosen it for the regional competition when she was 16, had practiced it for months until every note was burned into her muscle memory. It told a story without words, moving from quiet contemplation through rising tension to a triumphant resolution. It was about struggle and hope and the refusal to give up even when everything seemed impossible. She'd won first place with this piece. Her teacher had hugged her afterward, tears in her own eyes saying that Jenny hadn't just played the notes correctly. She'd understood them. She'd felt them. She'd made the audience feel them too. And now, more than 10 years later, her hands still knew every measure, every dynamic shift, every place where the music needed to breathe and every place where it needed to surge forward with power. It was still there, all of it, waiting inside her like a flame that had never quite gone out. Behind her, she heard the kitchen door swing open. More footsteps entered the dining room. The kitchen staff was coming out to listen. Carlos, the head chef who usually never left his station during service. Maria and Tommy, the prep cooks. Even Devin, the dishwasher who kept to himself and rarely spoke to anyone. They stood there in their whites and aprons, some still holding utensils or towels, completely mesmerized by what they were hearing. This was Jenny. Quiet, invisible Jenny who bussed their tables and never caused any problems. Jenny who they'd worked alongside for 3 years without really knowing at all. The piece was building toward its climax now. Jenny's hands moved faster, pressing harder into the keys. The volume increased, the emotion intensified. This was the moment in the composition where everything came together, where all the themes and melodies that had been introduced earlier returned in a powerful, unified statement. Her fingers flew across the keyboard in rapid runs that would have been impossible for anyone without serious training. Her foot worked the sustain pedal with precise timing, letting certain notes ring out while cutting others short. Her whole body moved with the music, swaying slightly, her shoulders rising and falling with the phrases. The businessman pulled out his phone again, but this time not to check emails. He opened his camera app and started recording. The couple at table 9 did the same, holding up their phones to capture what they were witnessing. Even the elderly woman gestured to her companion, who quickly fumbled for her purse and retrieved her phone. None of them were thinking about social media or views or going viral. They were simply trying to preserve this moment, to have proof later that it had really happened, that they'd been there on this random Thursday night when something extraordinary had broken through the ordinary. Richard stood near the kitchen door with his hand over his mouth, shaking his head slowly in disbelief. In 15 years of running this restaurant, he'd hired dozens of piano players. Good ones, talented ones, professionals who did this for a living, but he'd never heard anything like what he was hearing right now. The music reached its peak, a cascade of powerful chords that seemed to shake the air itself. Then gradually it began to soften again. The storm of sound gave way to gentler phrases like sunshine breaking through clouds. The piece was moving toward its ending, returning to the quieter themes from the beginning but with a new sense of peace, of resolution. Jenny's hands slowed. The notes became more spaced out, more deliberate. Each one carried weight and meaning. The final phrase came, a simple melody that seemed to float in the air for a moment before gently settling. And then with one last soft chord, the music ended. The silence that followed was profound. For several long seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the rain still falling outside and the distant rumble of thunder that had moved closer during the performance. Jenny kept her hands on the keys, her eyes still closed. She was trembling slightly, overwhelmed by what had just happened. She'd done it. After all these years, after all the loss and grief and putting that part of herself away in a locked box, she'd played again. Really played. And it had felt like flying. Then the applause started. It began with the businessman, who stood up from his table and started clapping loudly. The couple at table 9 joined immediately, also rising to their feet. The elderly woman and her companion stood and applauded. Richard clapped so hard his hands hurt. The kitchen staff joined in, whooping and cheering. Jenny's eyes flew open. She looked around in shock, suddenly aware of her surroundings again. Everyone in the restaurant was standing, applauding her, looking at her. Seeing her, her face flushed deep red. She stood up quickly from the piano bench, instinctively wanting to retreat, to disappear, to go back to being invisible. But her legs felt weak and shaky. She gripped the edge of the piano for support, overwhelmed by the attention, by the emotion still coursing through her, by everything. "Jenny!" Richard called out, walking toward her. His voice was thick with emotion. "Jenny, why didn't you tell me you could play like that?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. How could she explain? How could she tell him about the years of training, the dreams, the loss, the grief? How could she explain that she'd walked past this piano every single shift for 3 years, wanting to touch it but afraid of the pain it would bring? The businessman approached, still holding his phone. "That was incredible," he said. "Absolutely incredible. I recorded it. I hope that's okay." The couple from table 9 came over too. "We've been coming here for years," the woman said, her eyes bright with excitement. "We've heard a lot of good pianists, but nothing like that. Nothing even close." More people were gathering around now. The kitchen staff, the other diners. Everyone wanted to tell her how amazing it was, how moved they were, how they couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. Jenny felt dizzy. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to play some simple background music and then go back to waiting tables. She wasn't supposed to break open the sealed part of her heart. She wasn't supposed to let anyone see the real her, the her that had been hidden away for so long. Richard was standing right in front of her now, looking at her with a mixture of amazement and concern. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Jenny realized she was crying again. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. "I'm sorry," she managed to say. "You asked for simple background music." "I didn't mean to." "Are you kidding?" Richard interrupted. "Don't apologize. That was—" He struggled to find the right words. "Jenny, that was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard." "How long did you study piano?" 15 years, she whispered. "But I had to stop. I had to quit everything." "Why?" someone asked. She wasn't sure who. Jenny looked around at all the faces watching her, waiting for her answer. These were strangers mostly. People she'd served food to but didn't really know. And yet somehow in this moment she felt connected to them in a way she hadn't felt connected to anyone in years. "Life happened," she said simply. "Sometimes you have to let go of your dreams to take care of what matters more." The elderly woman stepped forward, her eyes wet with tears. "But you haven't lost it," she said firmly. "Whatever you had to give up, whatever you had to sacrifice, you haven't lost the gift. It's still there." "We all just heard it." Jenny nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The woman was right. The gift was still there. Buried, yes. Hidden away, but not gone, not dead. Just waiting. Outside, the storm had reached the restaurant. Rain pounded against the windows. Lightning flashed, illuminating the harbor beyond. And inside, in the warm glow of the chandeliers, Jenny stood surrounded by strangers who suddenly felt like friends, realizing that something fundamental had just shifted in her life. The piano sat behind her, no longer silent. No longer just a painful reminder of what she'd lost. Now it was something else. A door, a possibility. A bridge between who she used to be and who she might still become. The rest of that Thursday night passed in a blur. After the applause died down and people returned to their tables, Jenny tried to slip back into her waitress role. She picked up her order pad, attempted to check on the remaining diners, but everything felt different now. The mask she'd worn for 3 years had cracked wide open, and there was no putting it back on. Richard gently took the order pad from her hands. "Go home," he said kindly. "You've done more than enough tonight. Take tomorrow off too. Paid. You need time to process this." Jenny wanted to argue, to insist she was fine and could finish her shift. But the truth was she felt raw and exposed, like a nerve ending with no protection. She nodded, grabbed her purse from the back office, and slipped out into the rainy night without saying goodbye to anyone. The bus ride home was long and wet. She sat by the window, watching the city lights blur through the rain-streaked glass, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Her hands still tingled from playing. Her heart still raced. She felt exhilarated and terrified at the same time, like she'd jumped off a cliff and wasn't sure if she was flying or falling. When she finally reached her small studio apartment, she kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto her bed without even changing out of her uniform. She lay there in the dark, listening to the rain on the roof, replaying every moment in her mind. The feel of the keys under her fingers, the music pouring out of her, the faces of the people watching. The applause. She cried herself to sleep that night, but they weren't sad tears. They were the kind of tears that come when something frozen inside you finally starts to thaw. And it hurts, but it's a good hurt. A healing hurt. Jenny woke up the next morning to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Her phone had been on silent, and she'd been too exhausted to check it before falling asleep. Now, in the gray morning light filtering through her curtains, she stared at the screen in confusion. Most of the messages were from coworkers at the restaurant. Carlos had sent a video with 3 flame emojis and the words, "Jenny, you're amazing." Maria had written a long paragraph about how she'd cried watching the performance. Even Devin, who barely spoke 10 words a week, had sent a simple, "Wow." But there were other numbers too. Unknown numbers. One message included a link. Jenny clicked it with trembling fingers. The video started playing. It was her, sitting at the piano, playing. The quality wasn't great, filmed on someone's phone from across the restaurant, but the sound was clear enough to hear every note, every phrase, every moment of the performance that had poured out of her soul. She watched herself play, seeing what everyone else had seen. Her eyes were closed. Her face showed everything she'd been feeling. Pain and joy and longing all mixed together. She looked like someone who'd been holding their breath for years and was finally able to breathe again. The video had been posted on social media the night before. Jenny scrolled down to read the caption. Walked into a restaurant for dinner and witnessed the most incredible piano performance of my life. This is a waitress who just happened to play when their regular pianist called in sick. If this doesn't give you chills, check your pulse. The video had 3,000 views. 3,000 people had watched her play. 3,000 strangers had seen her at her most vulnerable, her most exposed. Jenny's first instinct was panic. She wanted to call whoever posted it and beg them to take it down. She wanted to disappear, to hide, to go back to being invisible. But as she kept scrolling, reading the comments, something shifted. This made me cry on my lunch break. Thank you for sharing. I've been a professional pianist for 20 years and this gave me goosebumps. She's incredibly talented. The emotion in her playing is unreal. You can tell this means everything to her. Does anyone know who she is? She deserves to be performing in concert halls, not waiting tables. There were hundreds of comments, hundreds of people moved by what they'd seen and heard. Some shared their own stories of giving up dreams for practical reasons. Others talked about hidden talents they'd abandoned. Many simply expressed how the performance had touched them, how it had reminded them that beauty still existed in unexpected places. Jenny set down her phone and walked to her window. The storm had passed during the night, and now the morning sun was breaking through the clouds, making the wet streets sparkle. She thought about her father, about how proud he'd been every time she performed. She thought about her old piano teacher, who'd told her that real musicians don't play for applause or recognition. They play because the music demands to be released, because keeping it locked inside is like trying not to breathe. Her phone rang. It was Richard. She answered hesitantly. Jenny, have you seen the video?
He asked without preamble. Yes, she said quietly. There's more.
Local news stations are calling. The morning show wants to do a segment. And Jenny... He paused and she could hear the smile in his voice. We've had 50 reservation requests for tonight. Everyone wants to come hear you play. Jenny's stomach flipped. Richard, I can't. I'm not a performer anymore. That was just... It was a one-time thing, was it? Richard asked gently. Because from where I was standing, it looked like something that's been waiting to happen for a very long time. After they hung up, Jenny sat on her couch for a long time, just thinking. Her apartment was small and plain, decorated with nothing personal. She'd been living like someone temporary, like someone just passing through her own life. The only photograph she displayed was of her parents, taken when she was 15 before everything fell apart. Her phone kept buzzing with notifications. The video was spreading. By afternoon, it had 50,000 views. By evening, over 200,000. Local news picked it up. Then regional outlets. Someone had identified her, shared her name, found out about her competition history from years ago. The story was too good not to tell. Talented musician forced to give up her dreams working as a waitress. Then one magical night she plays again and reminds everyone why music matters. Jenny's inbox filled with messages. Some from reporters wanting interviews, some from venues asking if she'd perform, several from people offering to give her piano lessons, not realizing she'd already had 15 years of training. A few from old competition rivals who remembered her and wanted to reconnect. But one message stood out from all the others. It was from a woman named Patricia Chen, the director of a community arts program across town. The message was long and heartfelt. Patricia explained that she'd seen the video and had been moved to tears. She ran a program that provided free music lessons to kids who couldn't afford them, many from the same kind of working-class backgrounds Jenny came from. Patricia needed teachers, good teachers who understood that music wasn't just about hitting the right notes. Teachers who knew what it meant to love music so much it hurt. Teachers who could inspire kids to keep going even when life got hard. I can't pay much, Patricia wrote honestly. But if you're looking for a way to reconnect with music on your own terms, without pressure or performance anxiety, this might be it. These kids need someone like you, someone who understands what it means to have a gift but not always have the resources to develop it. Jenny read the message 3 times. Then she walked to her closet and pulled out a box from the top shelf. She hadn't opened it in years. Inside were her old competition programs, her certificates, Photos of her with her first piano teacher, with her parents at various recitals. At the very bottom was her father's funeral program. She pulled out one particular photo. She was 13 in it, standing next to her piano after winning a regional competition. Her smile was enormous, unguarded, full of pure joy. She barely recognized that girl anymore. But maybe, just maybe, that girl was still somewhere inside her. Jenny picked up her phone and typed a response to Patricia. "I'd like to meet and talk about the teaching position. When would be convenient for you?" She hit send before she could change her mind. Over the next few days, the video continued to spread. It reached 1 million views, then 2 million. Jenny was recognized on the bus, in the grocery store, at the coffee shop near her apartment. Most people were kind, telling her how much her playing had moved them. A few asked for autographs or selfies, which felt surreal and uncomfortable. The restaurant became a sensation. Richard had to hire extra staff to handle all the reservation requests. He offered Jenny a permanent position as the house pianist, with a salary that would be twice what she made waiting tables. He told her she could set her own schedule, choose her own repertoire, have complete artistic freedom. It was tempting. It was safe. It was everything she thought she wanted. But Jenny found herself thinking more and more about Patricia's message. About those kids who loved music but couldn't afford lessons. Kids whose parents worked multiple jobs and struggled to make ends meet, just like hers had. Kids who might have to give up their dreams someday, just like she had. She met with Patricia on a sunny Saturday afternoon. The community center was old and needed repairs, but it was full of life. Kids of all ages filled the rooms, some painting, some dancing, some clustered around battered pianos and guitars. Patricia was a warm woman in her 50s with kind eyes and paint stains on her jeans. She showed Jenny around, introduced her to some of the students, explained her vision for the program. As they walked through the center, Jenny heard music coming from every direction. Imperfect music, beginner music, but music full of heart and hope. In one room, a little girl around 8 years old sat at an upright piano, carefully picking out a simple melody with one finger. She was so focused, so determined, her tongue sticking out slightly as she concentrated. Jenny saw herself in that little girl, saw the beginning of a journey that could lead anywhere, saw a spark that needed protecting and nurturing. "When can I start?" Jenny asked Patricia. Patricia's face broke into a huge smile. "How about Monday?" That evening, Jenny called Richard. She thanked him for his generous offer, but told him she'd decided to pursue teaching instead. She could still play at the restaurant occasionally, she suggested, maybe Friday and Saturday nights. But her focus was going to be on the kids. Richard was disappointed but understanding. "You're doing the right thing," he said. "Those kids are lucky to have you." After hanging up, Jenny sat at her small kitchen table and thought about the strange path her life had taken. One simple decision to play the piano had changed everything. It had opened a door she thought was permanently closed. It had reminded her who she was beneath the uniform and the invisible mask. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a musician, a teacher, someone with something valuable to offer the world. The video that had started it all was still circulating online, still touching people, still spreading. But Jenny had stopped checking the view count. It didn't matter anymore how many people had seen it. What mattered was what came next. 6 months had passed since that rainy Thursday evening at the Harbor View restaurant. Jenny stood in front of a modest upright piano at the community center, watching 12-year-old Luis work through a particularly tricky passage. His small hands stretched across the keys, his face scrunched up in concentration. "Don't tense up," Jenny said gently, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Remember what we talked about. Let your wrists stay relaxed. The power comes from your whole arm, not just your fingers." Luis tried again, and this time the notes flowed more smoothly. His face lit up with pride. "I did it." "You did," Jenny agreed, smiling. "That's the third difficult piece you've mastered this month." "You're getting really good, Luis." The boy beamed. 6 months ago, he'd never touched a piano before. His mother cleaned houses for a living and could never have afforded private music lessons. But here at the community center, Luis came twice a week and soaked up everything Jenny taught him like a sponge absorbing water. Jenny had 11 students now, ranging from age 7 to 16. Each one had their own story, their own reasons for being here, their own dreams about what music might mean in their lives. Some would probably never become professional musicians, but that wasn't the point. The point was giving them something beautiful to hold on to, a way to express themselves, a skill that would stay with them forever. Teaching had turned out to be different than Jenny expected. Harder in some ways, more rewarding in others. It required patience she didn't know she had, and creativity she'd forgotten she possessed. Every student learned differently. What worked for one kid completely failed with another. She had to adapt, improvise, find new ways to explain the same concepts until something clicked. But when it did click, when she saw that moment of understanding light up a child's face, it felt better than any applause she'd ever received. It felt like she was passing something forward, keeping the chain unbroken. Someone had taught her once, had believed in her talent and nurtured it. Now she was doing the same for these kids. The community center had become Jenny's second home. She taught classes 3 afternoons a week and Saturday mornings. The rest of the time she still played at the Harborview on Friday and Saturday nights. Richard had convinced her to keep that gig, and she'd discovered she actually enjoyed it. Playing for diners twice a week scratched her performance itch without overwhelming her. It kept her skills sharp and paid enough to cover her bills. The restaurant crowds were different now. People came specifically to hear her play, made reservations weeks in advance, requested favorite pieces. Sometimes it felt surreal, being recognized and appreciated like this, but Jenny had learned to accept it with grace. To say thank you when people complimented her playing, to sign the occasional napkin or pose for photos after her sets. The viral video had eventually faded from social media's attention span, replaced by the next trending thing. Jenny was relieved. The brief fame had been overwhelming and uncomfortable. She wasn't built for celebrity, didn't want her life dissected online. She just wanted to make music and teach kids and live a quiet, meaningful life. But some things had changed permanently. The video had reconnected her with people from her past. Her old piano teacher, Mrs. Hoffman, had tracked her down and they'd had lunch together. The elderly woman was retired now, but tears had streamed down her face as she told Jenny how proud she was, how she'd always wondered what happened to her most talented student. "I never forgot you," Mrs. Hoffman had said, gripping Jenny's hands across the table. "I knew you were special. I'm so glad you found your way back to music, even if the path looked different than we imagined." Some of Jenny's former competition rivals had reached out too. A few were professional musicians now, playing in orchestras or teaching at universities. Others had left music behind entirely, become doctors or lawyers or teachers in different fields. They all shared a common thread, though. The recognition that the teenage years spent pursuing musical excellence had shaped who they became, whether they stuck with it professionally or not. One Friday evening at the restaurant, Jenny had just finished playing a complex modern piece when she noticed someone standing near the piano. It was a woman around her age with kind eyes and a hesitant smile. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, "but I had to tell you something. I saw your video 6 months ago. I was in a really dark place then, dealing with depression, feeling like nothing in my life mattered anymore." Jenny listened quietly, sensing this was important. "Your playing reminded me that beautiful things still exist in the world," the woman continued, her voice thick with emotion. "It sounds dramatic, but it genuinely helped pull me out of that darkness. I started playing guitar again, something I'd given up years ago. It's been part of my healing process, so I just wanted to say thank you. You probably get this a lot, but your music mattered. It helped." The woman walked away before Jenny could fully respond, disappearing into the crowd of diners. Jenny sat at the piano for a long moment, blinking back tears. She got compliments all the time now, people telling her she was talented or that they enjoyed her performance. But this was different. This woman was telling her that music had helped save her life. That's when Jenny truly understood the weight and power of what she was doing. Music wasn't just entertainment. It wasn't just pretty sounds arranged in pleasing patterns. It was connection. It was communication. It was a lifeline sometimes for both the person creating it and the person receiving it. She thought about her students at the community center. Little Maya, who was so shy she could barely speak above a whisper, but who blossomed when she played piano. Darius, who had anger management issues but found that playing music calmed something wild inside him. Keisha, who dreamed of being a concert pianist and practiced hours every day despite having to share a piano with 5 other students. These kids were learning more than music. They were learning discipline and patience. They were learning that hard work led to progress, that mistakes were part of the process, that beauty could be created with their own hands. They were learning that they mattered, that they had value, that they could contribute something meaningful to the world. On Saturday mornings, Jenny arrived at the community center early to practice before her students showed up. She'd been working on new pieces, challenging herself, pushing her abilities to grow. Playing at the restaurant kept her performance skills polished, but this private practice time was for her alone. For the pure joy of wrestling with difficult music and emerging victorious. Patricia often arrived early too, bringing coffee and sitting quietly while Jenny played. One morning, about 7 months after Jenny had started teaching, Patricia spoke up during a pause in the practice session. "You know we're expanding the program, right?" Patricia said. "The city gave us additional funding. Your video brought attention to what we're doing here, and donors have been incredibly generous." Jenny turned on the piano bench to face her. "That's wonderful. We want to hire 2 more music teachers," Patricia continued. "And Jenny, we want you to help train them. To share your teaching philosophy and methods. You've become the heart of this program." Jenny felt a swell of emotion in her chest. 7 months ago, she'd been invisible, serving tables and hiding from her own gifts. Now she was being asked to train other teachers, to expand her impact, to help even more kids find music. "I'd be honored," Jenny said simply. That afternoon, during Luis's lesson, Jenny watched him play through a piece he'd been working on for weeks. He'd struggled with it initially, wanted to give up, said it was too hard. But Jenny had encouraged him to keep trying, to break it down into small sections, to be patient with himself. Now he played it beautifully, with confidence and feeling. When he finished, he looked up at Jenny with a huge grin. "My mom's coming to the recital next month," he said excitedly. "She's taking the afternoon off work and everything. She's never heard me play before." Jenny's heart swelled. The community center was organizing its first student recital, a chance for the kids to perform for their families and friends. Luis's mother worked 2 jobs and could barely afford to take time off. But she was making the sacrifice to see her son play piano. "She's going to be so proud of you," Jenny told him. Later that evening, Jenny walked home from the bus stop as the sun set over the city. She passed the same streets she'd walked for years, but they looked different now. Or maybe she was different. Probably both. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Big crowd tonight. They're already asking if you're playing. See you at 7? Jenny smiled and replied that she'd be there. She'd go home, change into something nice, and head to the harbor view. She'd sit at that same piano where everything had changed, and she'd play for people who'd come to hear her. Then tomorrow she'd wake up and teach Luis and Maya and Darius and all the others, watching their skills grow, nurturing their love of music. This wasn't the life she'd imagined when she was 16 and winning competitions. She wasn't performing in concert halls or recording albums. She wasn't famous or wealthy. But she was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way she hadn't been in more than a decade. Jenny had learned that dreams don't always die when you have to let them go. Sometimes they just transform into something different, something better.